Voilà ce qu'il se donne. Tout le bien.
Salve, benvenuti e benvenuto a
Sylvie Pras. Welcome to Sylvie Pras, director of the cinema movie theaters of the Centre Pompidou, and a lady who has been a long-term collaborator of KIAROSTAMI and co-scriptwriter of Coppia Conforme, the Italian film of Mr. KIAROSTAMI. We're going to be speaking French, and we are going to be simplifying. Welcome.
Cette présentation, c'est pour plusieurs raisons.
This presentation has been organized for very many reasons. It's a conversation that has multiple targets. First of all, it wants to put together friends, all the friends like Sylvie, and we have been working with her for many years, some centuries ago, for her activity at the Centre Pompidou, and also the presence of René Mulhouse at the Festival de La Rochelle, which is twinned with the Bologna Film Festival, that is usually being held on the same dates. So one of my wishes every year is to be able to go to La Rochelle, because we're never able to go because the dates are overlapping. There have been this year a differentiation in terms of the dates. So Sylvie managed to come here to the Cinema di Tradotto, and the pleasure of presenting work on KIAROSTAMI, one of the most continuous presences here in Bologna, and as well as the strongest one. We were lucky to have him as our guests about 10 times here at the festival, and I remember one opening of the festival about 20 years ago with a chat between Peter van Bag and Mr. KIAROSTAMI, really a formidable chat. And at the same time, the publication of the book. So the inauguration of the exhibition. So it was, they were very important moments for the knowledge and the upcoming work that has ahead of us and continues disseminating and studying more in depth all the works of KIAROSTAMI. So this publication, volume and DVD, but also the exhibition.
Depuis une vingtaine d'années, on s'est mis à produire des expositions et
for 20 years now, we have started taking care of exhibits, and for us it represents a formidable opportunity and chance to work in a different way at the artworks and the works by the filmmakers. And there are studies and publications, but the exhibition or the show is a unique occasion to show different branches of the art, information, as well as the relationship with the viewer and the spectator who comes to the events, because we are no longer viewers, spectators, or readers of a book, for instance, but there is a relationship that is more lively as well as interesting. So how to tell about an exhibition, what to say about a show. And this is one of the other targets of this conversation together. So, if possible, I reckon to bring over here in Bologna the exhibition of KIAROSTAMI, not maybe next year, but the year after, that we will be inaugurating on the Piazza Maggiore, that is part of our ambitious project, the most beautiful screen in the world, and an exhibition area that is going to be devoted to our own exhibits as well as others. How to present elsewhere an exhibition, a show or an exhibition that is organized elsewhere. First of all, I want to tell you something about your festival, because you're very lucky to have this extraordinary festival. It's the first time I come here for the festival. I have come here last night, and discovering films in a piazza that is overcrowded by spectators was a unique sensation and a true pleasure. So I want to thank you, Gianluca, really thank you. Massoumeh, myself and the Centre Pompidou, we're really happy that this exhibition will be able to be hosted here in 2 years. Talking about an exhibition is not a simple thing to do. We have prepared some images, and we will lead you and conduct you through a guided tour through the images that you're going to see on this screen. Why for this exhibit at the Centre Pompidou? In 2007, KIAROSTAMI had already been invited in terms of his collaboration with the Spanish artist Herisé, and we had presented already his installations, and we presented some of his films that unfortunately were in a disastrous state. But Abbas KIAROSTAMI unfortunately died 5 years ago, and for us he was really an important character, and he had a beautiful relationship with us for restoration of his films with MK2. And so we wanted to homage the works of a filmmaker, because for us he is not only a filmmaker or a director, but he is an artist 360 degrees, because beyond the installations we have presented, he was a photographer as well as a poet. And we thought it would be very important to compliment him and homage him, to present all the facets of the artist he was. So with Massoumeh, we decided to organize this exhibition. This is a free entrance exhibition, and the very entrance of the Centre Pompidou, so all visitors may discover it and visit it. And there are visitors who come to see the paintings by Miro, Matisse, or Picasso, and that maybe do not even know this director. And it's nice for us to know that these visitors are able to discover the works of this filmmaker. So we have conceived the exhibition this way, that is, the visitors who have never heard about KIAROSTAMI are able to discover his works the works of an artist, but we have organized it also for the cinephiliacs and the fans of this director, André Anton Galin, and we Bergele, and this was Alain Bergele was can be discovered as well with all the details, and we have and they can touch, put hands on details. Massoumeh, it's up to you. I would like to thank Gianluca myself for having opened this door. It's already the third time I come here to talk about this new start of the works of KIAROSTAMI and the Centre Pompidou, with the restoration that has been performed by the Immagine Ritrovata with MK2, with for the integrity of the whole works by KIAROSTAMI. So for us it's important to say that finally we have managed to organize this exhibition. Last year, thanks to COVID, we did not know whether we would make it or not, but the exhibition is there. It has been organized. KIAROSTAMI had a strong relationship with Italy, with Gianluca, with this festival. So in a couple of words, the essential has been said. For us, it is important to create a meeting, an acknowledgement for this artist, because he really had an artistic character that had multiple facets. So seeing this installation, this event with a filmmaker that was very demanding, as well as a script writer. In fact, he discarded many places and many exhibition halls because for him they were not ideal. And so since he's not with us, we were wondering how to pick the place. We made some considerations, Sylvie and myself, and we always had this approach of interpretation, interpreting KIAROSTAMI and conveying his performances that are multifaceted. So the title of the exhibition represents our approach. Where is our friend KIAROSTAMI? So this refers to the most well-known film, but also research on the artist, on the man, and trying to go back on his works, not only in a new way, but also grasping the spirit of this man that was a unique artist and who remains with us thanks to his artworks, knowing that we can get close to him and through him. So it's a tour, it's a visit, it's a promenade through his works and in other places. So it's interesting to know that there are other places and other people who want to host this event and exhibition. So this is a proposal made in a joyful and playful way. I've seen a documentary on Abbias KIAROSTAMI with intertitles, half an hour of documentary. And seeing this documentary, I was really embraced by his artistic magnitude, a very lightweight and playful entity with this approach, trying to see all the possibilities that are in our hands. And these are the difficulties of identifying and putting hands on his works. And thanks to the work by MK2, we have a filmography, we have the intertitles, we have made the restoration of his films. So it's a rigorous fund, but also it's a collection of poems, photos, a gallery that could to some extent codify and catalog his photos, has donated all his photos, so they were very generous. So we were pleased with what we could do with this gesture, with this approach that was respectful of KIAROSTAMI, trying to make up this puzzle made up of all his works, and so the access of, you see the doors of the access of the photographic exhibition. KIAROSTAMI made a lot of photos, and the latest ones would focus on architectural details. So you will see windows, doors, walls, and then there is the series of the doors. The photos have covered a time span of 20 years in his travels, and he was struck especially by abandoned doors, and so he photographed them. Once he completed the series, he wanted to collect these images. So at the end of the series, he would give a name, a spirit, a motivation to this collection, and the Aga Khan Museum of Toronto, there was the first exhibition in 2015, just before the death of KIAROSTAMI, and there were doors that were very big, huge, monumental, in spaces that were as large. The Centre Pompidou has offered 1,000 square meters as a surface for the exhibition of his photos. So you can enter into the area, and you can see some of his doors that welcome us and that are accompanied, as Mr. KIAROSTAMI said when in the Museum Aga Khan, that are accompanied with his poems. So the purpose is to transfer the importance of poetry in the works and poems in the works of KIAROSTAMI. We know he resorted to very many poems. So many film titles have been referenced, have been related to poems and collections of poems that were translated into Italian and French and have been published. But there is an artistic approach that is the approach of a poem. He always stated this. He always said it. When he was asked to mention the sources of his cinema works, and he would say, I'm not the son of a generation of filmmakers, but a generation of poets. So this is the fil rouge of this exhibition. The exhibition is divided into 13 chapters, so to speak, 13 parts, and each section, each part, has a different approach as to poetry. So it's a daily relationship he would entertain with poetry. So we have placed on the walls, on the writings that he would sketch down to and to show the game attitude. We have converted it into Daedalus of streets and roads imaging, and so there is this poetry of KIAROSTAMI, Die Marche. So it's the game of the bell. And as you will see Marel's game that will make you feel the playful relationship between KIAROSTAMI and poetry, because for him poetry was a game like a riddle or a piddle. It was not a sacred or a holy relationship. It was a relationship that was on a daily basis. And this is the entrance that brings us up high with the idea of wanting to show a relationship with a wider audience. So this car. You can see it. We have placed it at the center of Centre Pompidou, and this car was the faithful and the loyal companion of KIAROSTAMI, and he filmed this car itself, not only from the car. He would shoot some scenes. So he went in Tehran and went to the countryside of Iran in order to be able to think freely and absorb the emotions of the landscape thanks to this car. So the idea was to be able to allow the viewers, the visitors, to listen the sound of the editing of the film that together was created. So abstracts of 30 minutes of the most important films of the works that won the Golden Palm, and that show his work through this car.
De la voiture, donc des portes à la voiture, on continue, on chemine dans l'espace.
So from the doors to the car, now we see how the show continues. This is another viewpoint that brings us.
Now we go to posters, billboards, which could be found on the street, on walls. Very few people know that KIAROSTAMI started his career as a graphic designer for advertisement. Then he moved on to painting. I don't know whether you see it on the screen, but he made many billboards for his movies, but also for the films of other directors and several festivals and other events. So I don't know whether you can see this image. This is a poster he created. We did not want to show thousands of photographs, but there is a poster I love very much. He created for a movie called The Costume de Mariage, and so the wedding costumes. And so, if you can see it, he wanted to draw the dress with the title of the movie, which is the label of the dress. So we are in the 70s, more or less, and so we see the imprint of the graphic designer, but also the poet. This is a very poetic approach, a non-commercial one. And this is something that really interests us. Then the late 60s, early 70s, he worked for Pedagogy Institute for young people, and for this institution he made illustration for children's books. So here you have an example of a book, a children's book that we presented. We are in 1969. This book was illustrated by KIAROSTAMI, and the specificity of these beautiful images is that at the time he showed this true character and nature, the man considering children at the same level. So he doesn't illustrate children's book in a different way, a bit patronizing children. But really be too simple. No, his approach was totally different, and we see it in his movies. So we see traces of painting, of games. He plays a lot on the graphic elements of writing. So we have this side, which I discovered with Massoumeh, thanks to her. This side, this hilarious, lightweight side, so that children can really grasp the art of KIAROSTAMI. These illustrations, these billboards, brought him to the moving image, that is to say, cinema. And he made the titles for his movies and also the movies of other directors. And here we see all the titles on the right side, the image. And we really perceive the impact of the drawing, of the lines, and we realize that these drawings are tattoos. Tattoos that people wear on their body, so on the skin of the body. And he is well known all over the world, but a young filmmaker asked him to make the titles of for the poster of his movies, and he did so. He experimented the graphic design of the titles and came to a proposition that we present here. It took me some time to fully understand because why KIAROSTAMI wrote on a tissue paper. So then we see the making of, and we can see that KIAROSTAMI writes on reverse. And then we have another title. So we have a film, the exhibition focused on Shirin, one of his movies, and he writes the title on top in a very discreet way, and this is really beautiful.
Peut-être qu'on passe à... Non.
Non, on peut j'enchaîne si tu veux. Donc les génériques à la fois ont été l'entrée de KIAROSTAMI dans le cinéma. C'est parce qu'il
So we had the access, these drawings are the access of KIAROSTAMI in movies. So he was an illustrator of children's books, he created billboards for movies, and in '69 he was asked to create this cinema department. For him this was an opportunity, unexpected, but a unique opportunity to create a laboratory, a cinema laboratory, and he had free hands from an artistic point of view, in total freedom. He had the money, the means, and so he started to make an independent cinema. What he called the cinema made with pocket money. So he started with shots of cranes and helicopters, and then he understood what he liked to do with the means he had available. So this is a place of creation, but also he started to push the nouvelle vague of Iranian cinema. He is the forefather of that by creating these titles, and the way we present that in the exhibition. Sylvie worked a lot on these features, and we focus a lot that KIAROSTAMI never wanted to get into having a definition of what is cinema, what is photography. So he shifted away from labels. So the relationship with photography was completely detached from the issues of labeling or looking for artistic recognition. We have another curator at the Pompidou Center with the curator of the photography collection, and we see some images, the framed photographs that you find in the photo gallery of the Pompidou Center, and the glass door separating the space photography, the space for cinema, somewhat has disappeared. So we made this separation disappear, not only from a physical point of view in the museum, but also in this artistic configuration, as KIAROSTAMI wanted to do with his art, making a circular movement of his works. We present a collection of photos, and we had the opportunity to put together all the photo series, but there was the collection on Marin Carmine, the producer of KIAROSTAMI movies, but we highlighted the photos by associating them with pieces of poetry, but also considering the paging, the format of these poetry, these poems, by giving importance to the graphic features. So in this gallery you find the poems, which are very visual, and then you come across the photos, and the way the KIAROSTAMI frames the landscape is quite similar to the way he pages the poems. So we wanted to shift the dimension of the dialogue between poetry and image. In this photographic images gallery we screen this film that he shot for a Korean film, a film that was made exclusively starting from photos on the road. And so we listened to the voice of the filmmaker describing the importance of the path of the route for the Persian history, but with images of paths that he made. So here we have a dimension that should be transferred. The fact there are no boundaries between cinema, poetry, and cinema and images. And then when we walk out of the photographic gallery, we have this installation, which is the only part that we commissioned to another artist, and we involved another artist, asking him to interpret the gaze on KIAROSTAMI's works, an artist working in Europe with his work, but also working of script writing in France and Germany. And Annie, we asked the artist to present a project on the film that we presented in case number 1 and number 2, that is a historical film, because it's in the midst of the revolution, Iranian revolution in 1979, and the artistic production and cinema production stopped at the time during the Iranian revolution, but KIAROSTAMI continued to pursue this project that he started in 78-79. He continued shooting the films, notwithstanding the revolution taking place, and with this microphone he goes and interviews the participant of the Iranian revolution in the film, first case, second case. And so he made a very important approach. And here we see the interpretation of the film by another artist. And we have this gaze on this period, on this historical period, because KIAROSTAMI talks about a moral dilemma, and in particular of not only to students, but also to parents and spectators, and also participants in the revolution. The audiences in Paris, New York, Bologna do realize how extraordinary this documentary is about the Iranian revolution. But also you wonder about the history, the story of these people, and 7 personalities are being introduced here by showing them before and after. The approach is very simple. There is a first and after. And who are these people? When KIAROSTAMI made the documentary, so the introduction of the film and the interview of these people, and then the last photo of these people again. Some people were killed 2 years later during the revolution. Other people became very important figures in the Iranian Revolution. Aftermath, some women that are shown without veil or scarves, and 2 years later were fired by the television because they couldn't, they had to cover their face. So we have, on the one hand, we have the first and after, the last available image of these people, and then a biography of each of these 7 people, what they did in the 40 years after the film by KIAROSTAMI. This is a very beautiful installation showing the genius of KIAROSTAMI, because amidst the Iranian Revolution, he showed a wide scope, a wide image of people that found legitimacy in their role in the revolution. And so in this installation that we involved in the project, they showed the before and after of the revolution. These are very strong work, piece of work. When I see these images, one next to the other, you can see them. It seems like a work in progress, and everything is piled up. We see the doors, the images made by KIAROSTAMI, and then we have these faces. And this is a sort of a game that we made with Shirin. Shirin, it was a film that he made when he could not work any longer. I remember when he had an encounter with a talk with Bertolucci, and the physical suffering was really evident, and he said to Bertolucci how much he felt that he missed his cinema art. Abbas had a very brotherly relationship with Bertolucci. And he said, nothing can stop us from working. He says, I'm shooting a film in the basement. Do it in your home, even if you're not able to do it because you're in pain to do what you've done before. Keep on shooting. Maybe film something in your home. So a film that he made not only in a room with 3 chairs, but he showed, and he had all the most important women of the Iranian cinema in his basement. The actresses went to him, and they didn't know what was happening. 112 actresses. They spent a little bit of time in his basement, sitting on a chair, and KIAROSTAMI portrayed them. And the same thing that he did with staircases, with doors, taking photographs of the faces of these actresses with a digital camera, and he asked women to look straight into a piece of paper and to think about and to talk about a beautiful recollection in this piece of paper. So we have great actresses in the revolution period whose cinema career were cut short during the revolution, other that continue to have a career in the authorized cinema, other one that would become international stars. Then we have Juliette Binoche, and she was there in Tehran, and so she got invited, and she went then. So these 112 actresses tell what they want through their faces, and so there was she made this long feature film that is based only on the images and faces of these women, thinking about good and bad things, and considering the rights. So this with a soundtrack, a sort of Romeo and Juliet, Iranian style, and so he reproduced only just so we have a soundtrack over the faces, editing the faces on the soundtrack. Usually you do the opposite. So you have the impression of seeing this film and to perceive this love tragedy, but you only see the faces of these women. So this director was said to pay great attention only to male actors, but KIAROSTAMI adored this film because this intimacy that these actresses give to me is an open door on their lives. I would never be able to do so by making the usual films. He really adored and worshipped this film, and he used to see it tens of times. And we represent it as a wall, as a screen. We picked 30 faces. We picked 30 faces, 30 women, 30 actors, and looking at into the same direction, and looking at another woman, staring at another woman, a young woman child, that was filmed by KIAROSTAMI on a beach in Puglia region. And so there we asked the permission from the Film Archives of Paris, and he wanted to make a short feature on the hair of women, brunette, blonde, dark, black. So no scarf issues were faced. So he was in Italy, in the south of Italy, and on the beach, and let us look at a young girl to make some shots. So there were many young girls that wanted to become stars of the cinema, and KIAROSTAMI started to film them, these young girls. Would you like to become an actress? Of course, they all said yes. They're stars in their eyes. They wanted to become actresses, and so that you have a beautiful hair, but your friend is jealous about your hair, and so your friend cut your hair while you're sleeping, and she says, yes, is it true? But then hair grow up again, and I don't want to do it. When he told the young girls what he wanted to do, they wanted to really become stars of actresses, but I don't want anyone cutting my hair, making sacrifice. So we have this not one hair less. This is the title. And so women that in order to appear in Iran have to cover their hair with a scarf. If a woman cannot be shown in public with her hair down. You have to cover your head so that there's an interaction between the femininity seen by KIAROSTAMI and also what is being represented through these galleries to link us up on the gaze, the look. Something we find in KIAROSTAMI's work.
Jouer sur les mélanges, photos.
So we've underlined also the combination, the mixing between photos, cinematic traits, and on this module on the gaze, the look, KIAROSTAMI, as he did with those and photos, loved to go to museum.
Les toiles.
Snap photos of the visitors while they were looking at the artworks, and he liked, and we see it in his cinema but also in the photos, he loved reflexes. You know that in his films very often there are sequences in which the characters pull out the car. Let's think of Tokyo, but also Copia Conforme. and vis-à-vis copie conforme, we like to get close to the extract by Juliette Binoche, and she is reflected on the painting. I don't know if you may see the image here, in which you can see the reflections. And you can see it here next to another photo, because KIAROSTAMI here snaps photos of the visitors who are looking at this painting of Larue, and who at the same time paints the visitors at the Louvre. So selecting with Florian Massoumeh all these photos, we have seen how much KIAROSTAMI liked and played around with the images, with the true and the false, exactly the same as he has managed to do in his films, where he has added reflections, he has added characters to the image. He liked to play with the painter, Monet. So you see this photo that is huge, enormous, and with Florian we really loved it. 3-4 meters. The famous Monet painting with poppies, and Abbas added the image of this cow that looks at us with her sweet eyes, with her tender eyes, and I wondered how big this photo was, and KIAROSTAMI has given as a gift the photo to Massoumeh, but actually it's small, and it has not been presented anywhere because it's not a public exhibition. And when he was in the hospital, and you have a photo montage of photos of KIAROSTAMI overlapping and superimposed on images of the paintings by Monet. We get on with another module of the exhibition, that is the perpetual movement and motion of life. And here we come to the cinema of Abbas. We see at the very beginning the first film that is called the Per Larue, the first short film. And here we show it totally, and here in the show, because it lasts about 10 minutes. And it shows what Abbas wanted to do against everybody, because he shoots a film in full sunlight at midday, and the protagonist is a young boy coming back to his home with some bread, and he crosses a dog that scares him a lot. So KIAROSTAMI shows us how this this child finds the solution to reach his home with his bread, despite his fear of the dog. And in the short film, this is demonstrated. So we show the films, the moving films of KIAROSTAMI, but often we see that he has represented characters or children that were found themselves against hurdles, but still found solutions for these obstacles. There is I don't know if you can see it on this image.
À présenter ces grands écrans, ces extraits de films.
We have presented abstracts of the films on these screens in a zigzag mode to refer to the zigzag motion of the films, like Where is the House of My Friend, and the graphic aspect, and the director that made the poster of this film with this tour, this zigzag stroll. So the visitor follows the exhibition starting from the first films by KIAROSTAMI, films that are unknown, that we are lucky here to be able to have people discover, not only in movie theaters, but also in DVD format. So it's very important to be able to touch the various films up to getting to the screen where there is the abstract of the film, Where is the House of My Friend?
Voilà. Donc, oui, en effet, c'est une exposition qui vraiment met le...
So it's a show that sees the participation of the spectator, exactly like KIAROSTAMI did throughout his film and artistic route. And for instance, this thanks to the COVID, the spectator cannot get too close to these elements, but it's still an interactive show. And our objective was to allow the viewer, the spectator, to be close to the artist and be able to interact with him, and not being in a relationship of distance. That often was being highlighted by the critics who defined his cinema as a sort of a cold film mode. And likewise, KIAROSTAMI was an artist who attributed great importance to the closeness with his public. And the show lies itself in an easy way to this interaction. Many children come to see this exhibition, and they create play with the shadows. So there is movement, which is the essence of the cinema of KIAROSTAMI. So the spectators go from one scheme to the other, and they can, these works can be seen from the front as well as from the rear, from the back, so they can reach to the last tour, that is where this film, Where's My Friend's Home, in the village where this friend is being searched for. And we have been caught by seeing this image of this staircase in stone that looks like the series of staircases that KIAROSTAMI photographed in the year 2000, about 20 years later. Many of these stairs are in Italy. And here the series of the stairs was an obsession for him. He had an incredible relationship, very close to photography. And so he was wondering, what shall I do with these photos of the stairs? Shall I create a book on the stairs? Well, I don't know. Then I called him up, and he said, I'm really happy because finally I understood what to do with these stairs, which I took photos of. And for 2 years he stayed at home working at these images, because he had decided to render these series of photos and make them into a film. By the title, Take Me Home. So he made this film where you have this child leaving a balloon, a ball behind the door, which is present. This ball is present also in the first film, because it was a film on soccer. And this film, The Closed Door, there was an obstacle, there was a hurdle, because the ball doesn't want to overcome this obstacle, and he opens the door, and this ball falls onto the stairs. This is a digit with a succession of the photos of these stairs with the ball that falls from one stair to the other, with sound, with music soundtrack. So there is this glance in front of the gallery where there's a succession of the screens, and we get to the corner where you have 12 images of these stairs, and on the other hand, in the same magnitude, the film on the screen. So we see once again how KIAROSTAMI did not hesitate to pass from photography to cinema and convert photography into cinema. So contamination between the various styles and the digital for KIAROSTAMI represented truly a turning point that was incredible. If he had worked 20, 30 years beforehand, I don't know what his artistic trajectory would have been. He always wanted to experiment, make something new, test new ways, new routes, and the digital allowed him to follow up his own nature and spirit and inventing another direction, in some way overcoming the obstacles that would come up in front of him. And this promenade brings us to the heart of the exhibition, also from the point of view of the spaces and the heart of. So we get to the house of KIAROSTAMI. So this itinerary brings us to his home, a biographic aspect that is very important, because KIAROSTAMI, despite all these continuous transformation of his life, passing from being a graphic designer to the art craft profession, well, he has become a filmmaker of international reputation and fame, and the country where he lived was the prey of a revolution, and his efforts were difficult. But despite these revolutions, he stated that the only revolution was not the Iranian Revolution, but despite this, he was faithful and loyal to his house, that he built at the beginning of the 70s, that at the beginning was at the periphery of Tehran, but this house that he built was the place of the creation, the place of his life. KIAROSTAMI, whether he were in Paris, Kyoto, or Toronto, one day after the end of the shooting, would go back to his home. There was no way to make him stop one day more where he was working, but he had to go back to his home. And then there was a room in his house that was his atelier, and it was there that he wrote his poems. It was there he did the digital editing with his assistants. He was really an artisan, because he would create every frame of his photos, and he worked in this this cave. It was his place, the place of his heart, and he created a poem that he hung on this cave, and it's in the reproduction of this cave that he shows the brick walls, and we went there where he shot Cherenghi, and we sat on these very small little blue chairs that give the idea of the cinema, and we discovered the short film that I talked about before, and the editing he made himself with his own images and images of the making of his films, the images where we see him working in this place, this cave, a place that is very little, no way conventional, but it's a creation place. And we asked him, and so we see that his portrait in this place with his way of working. So we have recreated these chairs, recreating the ambience of his cave and the intimacy of the house, the home of his KIAROSTAMI. There is 3 parts. The cave that opens up on 2 other rooms devoted to the visceral relationship the KIAROSTAMI entertained with poetry. And here we represent works that are not known outside Iran, that represent a huge work of exegesis of the classic poetry of Iran. The poetry is a substrate of Iranian culture. There are these poems that expressed in the 12th and 13th century through works that Iranians once upon a time knew very well, then that went lost and lost on the way. So it's a century-like glance on this corpus without a start and an end that has gone lost. So people did not know these poems. So surely you have understood through our presentation that KIAROSTAMI was a hyperactive person. So creation was the constant aspect of his life. He passed from cinema to poetry. During the night, at night he couldn't sleep, and he passed through the various forms of art. So he created this this framing work exactly as he did in his films and his photos. So he put the classic poetries in frames with very short lines and sentences with verses that in the past were known by the population, that have no beginning, no end, and he has put them into a frame. And it was a way for him to express his form of art. So he decided to isolate these verses and publish them tel quel. So there are a series of collections that are divided by poets or by themes. For instance, a collection on love and classical poetry, but also modern Iranian poetry, and then a collection on the night. 2 volumes, 2 books have been published, and they were beautiful because he would take care of every detail, the cover, the aesthetics, the font.
La nuit du poète, donc un volume où ce sont des poèmes.
And the paging as well. So he created these books, The Night of the Poet, where he isolated the verses of the classic poetry of Iran and modern poetry. So when we get out of this room of the cave and we enter a very dark corridor, so there is this game with darkness, a moment in which he could not make any cinema. He devoted his art to poetry. So we have the darkness, the black. So he tried to leave the spectator in the darkness, like in the Flavor of Cherry.
Donc c'est ce film qu'il a tourné en Angola.
In the Taste of Cherry, and this film, then he shot this film in Angola, and there is a blackout, and the spectator remains about 10 minutes in the dark. And there is the hand of KIAROSTAMI lighting a match. So the darkness is opened up by the small flame of a match. So also here we need the Sylvie Pras and her devotion, because she asked the service of the sapeurs-pompiers of the Centre Pompidou to collaborate. So you are in the darkness, and then you see these poems, and the idea is to screen them as light flies, and these lamps that have been selected by KIAROSTAMI himself. So light forms in translated forms, so in French, they are in French and parents, and voices that in Persian.
Troisième salle, c'est une salle.
All these verses. Then the third room is a room that we call Meeting and Abandonment, and here we have the classics of Iranian poetry, and because it regards thousands of verses, and we should define them, we could define as poems of love, but we never know who they are devoted to, whether it's in a mystic love.
Inhumain, donc l'être aimé.
The Iranian language does not has any gender, so female and male. So it can be the love for God, for a man or a woman, or so.
Celui qu'on aime ou être séparé.
Union and abandonment, so being with.
Donc c'est pour ça qu'on a appelé aussi.
This is the theme of the poetry of Iran, and so that's why we have called it Union and Abandonment, because Kiarostami is the search for the friend. Where is the house of my friend? And so so there is this search for the other, and he has always tried to get out of the walls of the place where he was creating, that is in the cave, and go towards the other. And here we present 24 frames, posthum film in which he freed himself of the difficult elements, so there are no longer the problems of adults, of children, but very short films in which he is a protagonist, because he played with photography and other elements. So a love story represented by animals, ducks, horses, which is my favorite, that he devoted to Martin Scorsese. So you see you can see it in this image, a photo that was taken from his car. So these films are the films that are the most playful ones. Films that he experimented with the new technology. So here we can perceive his poetic, mystical, abstract feeling that pervades all the works by Kiarostami. So we also present other works he has produced that are very close to this mystical gesture. So, Così fan tutte is one reference in the Festival of Aix-en-Provence. Unfortunately, he managed only to put in place this opera only once.
Festival d'Aix-en-Provence lui a demandé de mettre en scène Così fan tutte.
And the Festival of Aix-en-Provence asked him to manage this opera, Così fan tutte, and what he did, what they asked him is, you have to deal with the music. So you have to be at the level of Mozart, forgetting the text while staging this work. I hope nobody will read my translations, but he would say, this is not, no way, a frivolous text, but it's very important to highlight the sagacious love, and not to expect from one's woman faithfulness and to be loved by everyone. So he quoted often some poems. Stay with us, don't fall. So we present here. So we present some aspects of the staging of this opera with the we have put intertitles of the poetry of Iran with the technological forms as he liked them to be. So intertitles that are underneath are verses of classic poetry. And he participates in this technical, playful relationship with selected poems, and he would repeat, you are lucky to be part of a generation in which you don't need to court a woman with chit-chats for hours on end, and he was fond of these Twitter messages, very short messages. For him, the Chinese fonts, the characters that would be formed on the screen, was fond of the new technologies. So we have two screens representing screens of telephones. So these two telephones communicate one another with a classic Iranian.
So today's conversation based on love, with all the issues of sending text when there are misunderstandings, but with the classical poetry of the 12th century. So KIAROSTAMI was extremely modern and belonging to this, to the aesthetic and mystic tradition, but also with modernity. And this is the heritage of Iran. And we move away from this room, we end our path, and then after all the walls and the stairs and the doors, we get to the windows. So we enter through the door and we leave through the windows. With photos of windows, there is an album which is not well known, where he shot images indoor, in Provence, in Italy, in Iran, very dark interiors, where the only light spot was a window. So there is a very strong contrast. And again, we find the look, the gaze of 24 frames, and we have the window in his home, and we leave his home through the window, and on the wall we see another window of the series Monet and Me. And we leave the exhibition exiting from the window. Thank you for your description. Really, we want to visit this exhibition. Thank you for your kind words and thorough description.
Non, c'est fini.